24 projects. I will start with just a brief overview of the capital transportation program and kind of DelDOT's process on how we get projects from kind of an idea all the way through to construction. And then happy to answer questions on any other items that you may have. I am a Sussex Countyan, and I am actually a Route 24 resident. So I live right behind the Giant on Route 24. So very familiar with Route 24, its operations. As you and I were discussing before the meeting started, I do commute to Dover every day. So I also use some back roads and then end up on Route 1. So I have a lot of experience and perspective on that as well. But obviously, love to hear from people who, live here, work here, to understand what your needs are as we're delivering projects within Sussex and specifically kind of in the Millsboro, Rehoboth, Lewis, Milton area. So I've prepared just a few slides that I'll go through, and I'm happy to email them to you afterward. So let's see if I can get, there we go. So we always start all of our presentations with our mission statement, which is to provide excellence in transportation for every trip, every mode, every dollar, and every one. We especially love this mission because it actually was developed by employees back in, I want to say it was like 2012 or 2013. We had, prior to that, we had the normal really long mission statement that no one knew what it was. And so this one is pretty concise, but it's very powerful as well. And our goal is to deliver excellence in transportation for various modes, for all the different also, all of the projects that come through from the private sector, through our transit operations, and everything we do, we're striving towards excellence. So just a quick slide on organizational structure. As you may know, Secretary Cohen left our organization at the end of October. And so our Deputy Secretary, Nicole Majeski, has been appointed by the governor to become Secretary of Transportation, but that has a confirmation process that will take place in January. So in the meantime, she is acting Secretary of Transportation. I am acting Deputy Secretary, as well as Chief Engineer. We have many divisions within the department that deliver all that you see, from services to maintaining and operating what we have, as well as planning for the future and delivering projects now. I wanted to highlight really quickly some of the DelDOT online resources. We have done a lot of work to get a lot of information on our website so that you have access to everything that you need to know kind of at your own fingertips. So the upper left picture is our DelDOT projects portal. If you go to DelDOT.gov, there is a traffic cone in the middle of the kind of top bar that says projects. If you click on that, it takes you to this screenshot that I have here. You can type in the name of a project, or you can use the map feature to zoom in on a specific area to see if a project is happening and get specific details on the project description, the project schedule, and a current update, as well as any conceptual plans that we may have or workshop boards, et cetera. In the middle of the screen, you'll see the DelDOT Gateway. Also, you can get to that from the DelDOT.gov page. The Gateway is really kind of this great data resource. It has tons of layers. You can make your own maps, or you can use maps that we've pre-made to look at projects in the CTP, to look at roads and figure out whose responsibility is to maintain them. You can look at traffic volumes. Let's see, you can see what maintenance area within DelDOT is responsible for plowing a specific road. So we've got, I want to say there's probably 75 different layers of information that you can add into a map and get information on your own. Also, if you don't have it, I highly suggest that you download the DelDOT app. It is free and is available for both Androids as well as Apple products. That also has a ton of data in it. Specifically related to travel times. You can also get to those project pages that I talked about a little while ago. You can turn on a layer that shows you where the snowplows are. We're in that winter season now, so you can see that. You can get snowfall totals. Again, a ton of information. You can look at our cameras You can look at kind of travel times and a bunch of information. So I highly recommend that you download that. Also, our transit arm of our organization, DART, they have two apps. They have the DART app, which can give you information about bus routes, when a bus is going to be at a certain stop. You can actually map a route out and figure out which bus routes to take. And then their second app is actually a mobile fare payment app. So you can actually, especially in these COVID times, instead of having to handle money and all of that, you can actually just use your phone to pay for a DART pass to board a bus. And then the last piece is My DMV. We have, pre-COVID, we had actually shifted a lot of our services to online so that people had greater access to them. And so you sign up for a My DMV account and you can do a ton of things related to your driver's license, registrations, you name it. And there's also a lot of good information. The Real ID compliance was shifted from October of this year to October of next year. And when that takes effect, you won't be able to enter certain federal buildings or board a plane without having that Real ID. So that's really important. And there's a lot of resources online related to that. So just like to share all of the information that we do have available online so that you can get information that you need quickly. So moving on to the project development process that you will ask me to talk about. So the Capital Transportation Program is our 6-year plan for projects statewide. They can be individual projects like what you see along the Route 24 corridor. They can be more programs like our paving program, which is a statewide program. We have all of our transit projects that are in there. Basically, everything that we're going to work on from a capital standpoint has to be in that 6-year book in order for us to work on it. So the way that it works is we get ideas from metropolitan planning organizations, also known as MPOs. So up north, it's WillMapCo. In Kent County, it's the Dover-Kent MPO. And then in Sussex, both DelDOT and the county kind of function as the MPO. MPOs are regulated by the federal government. They're based on census data. There is a small sliver of Sussex that is within an MPO, and it's actually the Salisbury-Wicomico MPO. It's along the Route 13 corridor. It's our expectation that after the 2020 census, there will likely be an MPO that covers Sussex County at that point. But for now, both DelDOT and Sussex County kind of serve as that function for Sussex at the moment. So we get ideas from MPOs, we get ideas from local governments, so any of the municipalities within the state, and then also the community. Tons of feedback, whether it be at a workshop for a project and someone may mention, another location that they feel like needs some work. It can be through community groups such as Sussex 2030. It can be homeowners associations, you name it. We get ideas really from a ton of different people, and then it's really kind of sorting through those ideas to figure out what we have the money to work on. So you take all of those new ideas. We actually run them through a prioritization process. The software we use is called Decision Lens, and there's I can send Yule a link that she can send out, which kind of talks about the whole process of prioritization. But basically, we look at several different areas. So safety is our number one. So if we take the crash rates and use that as a factor to determine prioritization, we also look at congestion. And that's a factor. We look at multimodalism. So is this project going to provide multiple modes with options? We look at the environment and the project's impact on the environment. We also look at any kind of extra funding that may come from the private sector for a project. So if there's a development in the area and they have to contribute a certain amount, that can give a project a little bit of a bump. And there's a few other things that tie into the prioritization process, but we basically run everything through that process. And then we have a scoring for all the projects that went through prioritization. Then we take that scoring and we apply the different funding that we have for a given year to it. And from a federal standpoint, we call it different colors of money. So The federal government, we get about $250 million a year from them to deliver capital projects, but there are strings attached to that $250 million. So some of it can only be used for bridges. Some of it can only be used for certain types of roads. So you can only use it on a Route 1 or a 13. Some of it can only be used for safety improvement. Some of it can be used for congestion management. So there's different colors or flavors of money that we have to then apply to that ranking and kind of have a cutoff for each fiscal year of what money was available and what could we fit in as we use the ranking. All of that then becomes the draft capital transportation program, also known as the CTP. We take that out to public hearings in the fall of every other year. So every other September, there will be public hearings where we basically lay out that draft plan and we get comments from people. We have a court stenographer that's there, so people go on record with their comments. They can also supply written comments, and we have staff there to answer a ton of questions. That gets folded or forwarded, I should say, to the Council on Transportation. They are an advisory group codified through legislation that oversees the department's CTP. They oversee the piece of it that relates to these standalone projects. So they don't have a purview over any of our state of good repair programs like paving, bridges, and some of our other kind of bigger programs. But all of these individual projects that then shake out, they have a purview over. They make sure that we're following our prioritization process. They make sure that they have reviewed the comments that were received and can make kind of priority-based decisions on shifting things. So they can't take the number 200 project and move it to number 1. They still have to follow the prioritization process, but they can say, hey, DelDOT, why did you do, why are you moving forward with this project and not this project? And so they actually vote on the CTP they have to send it to the governor basically by March 1st, again, every other year. And so they have a very active role. We meet with them about 4 times a year. And they're a group of 9 individuals that are appointed by the governor. There has to be balance with political parties, and there's also balance within the 3 counties of the state. Once they forwarded that on, it kind of goes through the legislative process then, and ultimately gets what we call bond bill approval. So there's a joint committee in the legislature that reviews all of the capital projects for all of the different state agencies. And so they will give us approval for the first fiscal year of the CTP. So back in June, we received approval for fiscal year 21, which is what we're in now. So our fiscal year runs from July 1 to June 30. And so we are currently in fiscal year 21, and that's the approval that we got through the legislature. And then we start that process all over again. So it's a very cyclical process, but it's data driven, and it holds us accountable and doesn't allow for a ton of flexibility. If a really great new idea comes in mid-year, I have to get approval before I can work on it. So it makes sure that we are kind of maintaining continuity in what we've said we were going to do, but also gives the opportunity for new ideas to come in on an every 2-year basis. The other piece of that I want to make note of is there are other lines of funding within the CTP. For instance, our planning division, they do a ton of studies. So they have a line item in the CTP to be able to study something. And it doesn't have to be well-defined when the CTP it goes through the process. So they have kind of a pot of money. My traffic safety folks have a pot of money so that they can look at things that come up here and there, which allows us to then be nimble when it comes to smaller type of projects, and or at least have a plan for a larger project. I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions? And you'll have to tell me because I can't see everybody with sharing my screen. You're on mute, Yul. Any questions?
Yes, I don't see any hands so far. I have a question. Oh, Keith has a question. Why don't you go first?
Okay. Shante, thank you very much for being here. You mentioned a minute ago about the MPOs. and
Yes.
that Sussex County is represented by a combination of a county and DelDOT. Who in the county government is on that?
They have, so they have a planning division, and the name is escaping me, but I can get it to you. But basically they're planning folks, as well as council, the county administrator, they all kind of provide that feedback to DelDOT. So in Newcastle County and Kent County, they actually have an established MPO that has staff that does a lot of community outreach, et cetera. Because we don't have an MPO for Sussex County at the moment, again, we expect that when the 2020 census data comes out, that the federal government will then, there will be a requirement for us to have an MPO for Sussex. And at that point, then there would be an entity that's doing a lot more of that planning effort. But so there are ideas generated by a variety of people through the county. DelDOT also does a ton of studies, and kind of together we create this list of here are the needs for Sussex. And then again, it gets folded into that prioritization process to figure out what can move forward.
Okay, well, thank you.
Does that help?
I lived in Newcastle County for 15 years, and I went to WMATCO meetings frequently. So I'm glad to hear that there's serious consideration being given to creating one here, because we definitely need something like that for public input.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Shante, I have a question about the public hearing period every other September. Is that just past September or the next September?
It will be so this coming September 2021, so the odd years.
Okay.
We used to do it every September, and we switched a year or two ago to making this an every 2-year process, because one thing that I didn't get a chance to mention is because of the expansive amount of needs statewide, you know, that list of what we can kind of start doing every year is very small. So typically the first 3 years or so of that 6-year plan are really locked in. And so any new ideas won't get started from a design standpoint until year 4, 5, or 6. And that's simply because we have to have some continuity in our process. Otherwise, you know, you could have a new idea that it ranks #1 every year, you know, a brand new idea. And you're never going to get anything done if you're always just starting new things and not finishing things that are in there. And so what we found is we were doing the hearings and the process every year, but really nothing new would be able to start into years 4, 5, or 6. So by going to 2 years, it just allows us to one, not waste time going through that whole process. There's a whole, we call it the book, that gets developed that has to go to federal highways. It's a very thick binder, and our staff was having to do that every year when there wasn't really a lot of things changing in those first 3 years. So that it was kind of an efficiency thing. And so with that, the public hearing process then also moved to every other year. So on the odd numbered calendar years is when you'll see those hearings. And they're typically like the 3rd or 4th week in September for Sussex.
So the process itself is 2-year cycle, and the plan is in 6-year plan, right?
Yes.
Okay. To get familiar with this process, can the public participate in certain committees or meetings, or, you know, what would you suggest that public do to get familiar?
Sure. So I would say there's a couple of things from a Sussex standpoint. Sussex County does do a public hearing related to this piece, and I can find out some more information on when they hold that, but they do solicit public comments on that list that they're generating before it gets submitted to us. So that's one way. Also, the Council on Transportation meetings are open to the public. We actually have one coming up this Thursday at, I want to say it's 3:30 p.m. and it's virtual. You can go to the DelDOT website, and I can also send you information on it. Let's see, at Council of Transportation, 3:30. And so those meetings, I think, would be very informative to kind of understand both the process, this whole piece, but also the secretary typically gives an update on the department's finances. We'll have for this one coming up, an update on kind of COVID and its impact on the department as a whole, as well as on our finances. So I would say that that's a great way to get involved. And then if you ever, want a deeper dive into the CTP, either myself or staff would be happy to kind of walk your group through that in a more detailed way after you've had a chance to actually look at it. It's it's a big document. We've tried to streamline it, but it's still pretty big.
Also, is there somewhere we can find the current CTP program projects?
Yes. Yep. It's all on our website. So DelDOT.gov. If you click on publications and go to the bottom middle column, you'll see Capital Transportation Program. Excuse me. And it has the current CTP as well as previous CTPs, so you can kind of see what's happened over time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody else has any questions?
Yes, Shante, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, Rich Barrasso with Sarge. How are you?
Hi, Rich.
Thank you so much for making yourself available. Quick question. I know that in the CTP, each of the entries are listed by a specific roadway or intersection. How do TIDs fit in?
Sure. So TIDs, at least in Sussex, are brand new.
Right.
We just had the Henlopen TID that was created. So there are, if you'll recall, Rich, within the TID, we already had a number of projects that were already funded in our capital transportation program. So those are already showing. Additional TID projects that haven't been scheduled yet are really going to go through kind of a triggering, like a monitoring and triggering process. And so as they're needed, they would get folded into the CTP as well. So you won't see, we have TIDs all up and down the state. You're not going to see all of the projects that are within a TID in the CTP at this time. But as they're needed and triggered, they would then get folded into the process.
Does a TID have any more weight because it has a much larger impact in a given area?
It sure does. So I talked a little bit about the prioritization process. One of those categories, I want to say it's economic development. It has a piece in there about private funding. And I think long-term, there is also a goal to have something for a TID. I don't recall whether there's something specifically in there about a TID now, but because it has kind of that set-aside funding, it will get a bump from that just because. And if we have the full funding for it available, regardless really of where it ranks, that money has to go towards that TID and those specific projects. So it would kind of shake out because of that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Is there anybody else?
Yeah.
Questions?
Could I follow up with a specific question about the Henlopen TID, which is,
Sure.
I know one of the things that's in that is the expansion of Mulberry Knoll Road up to Route 9. So would that, I guess that hasn't been put into the process yet, so we could expect that that might take at least 6 years to get into the process, or what?
We are actually just kicking off a study for that specific project. And so we are looking at it to determine what an alignment and or multiple alignments could be to accomplish that. In parallel, we're also looking at Plantation Road and whether it should be 4 lanes, 2 in each direction. And you're going to do one or the other. You're likely not going to do both, but the traffic data is going to drive that decision. And then, you know, the environmental process, cost, all of those things will be factored in. But we are kicking off the study, so not a design effort, but studying the traffic information so that we know what the correct alternative will be, so that we can get a price on it and then ultimately figure out how to fold it into the plan.
Thank you very much.
So once a project is approved and we have that first year where we have funding to start the design work, that's what we do. We go out and we get topographic survey to understand what exists there. We get information on utilities, wetlands, any historic properties and resources that there may be. We gather a ton of data, and then we start kind of overlaying a conceptual design on an aerial, basically, and say, okay, here are the project needs. So we need to improve the pedestrian safety, or we need to reduce congestion, or we need to have bike and ped facilities and transit facilities don't exist there. And so we start kind of laying things out. And for some projects, it's easier to lay things out because you only have kind of one option to widen kind of to the outside. But when you look at some of our grade separations up and down Route 1, there are numerous alternatives that you can pick. But regardless of whether there's just one or several, we then take those out to public workshops. And so you all have, I'm sure, participated in those over the years. We have all of the maps, all of the designs, all of the information, cost information, right-of-way needs, and we put that all out there and we ask for feedback. Was there something that we didn't take care of that you see as an everyday problem? Or is there some, piece of sidewalk that we didn't add that would make a huge improvement to connectivity for pedestrians? And so we solicit all of that feedback. Sometimes we have one workshop, sometimes we have two workshops for a project. It just depends on the size and complexity. And our team then takes all of that information back and refines the design further. And they have to refine the design to a point where we know exactly what we need from each and every individual property owner. And then we can begin the right-of-way acquisition process. And that is where we're working with each property owner. We get an independent appraisal done, and then we make an offer to a property owner, and there's a whole negotiation process. And ultimately, they'll sign documents. I would say about 95% of our projects kind of go that pretty standard way. There may be a little bit of back and forth, but we get a signature. Some property owners we can't come to agreement with, and then we have to go through the legal process to obtain possession of the piece of their property that we need. And so that right-of-way acquisition process, people don't realize how long it can take, but it can take years depending on the number of properties per project. Because again, it's an individual negotiation with each and every one of those property owners. And we have multiple projects going on where we're doing this same effort. So it can take a long time. Once we've obtained all of the right-of-way, then the project can be bid for advertisement for construction. And so we accept bids from contractors. We typically use the low bid process for 99% of our projects to select a contractor, and that's in state code. There are a couple of other alternative contracting mechanisms that we have authority to use and we have been using. None of them apply to the Route 24 corridor though. Some on Route 1 and 95 and an upcoming 113 project. And then the contractor starts construction and they can, the good thing about the low bid process is you're getting hopefully the lowest price. The more challenging thing is that we've done the design kind of in a vacuum and the contractor hasn't been involved in that process. And so they get the project and they decide that they want to build it a completely different way than the way we thought they would build it. And so that can then change some of the schedule. We also can run into utility relocation issues at times, and that can also extend the duration of construction. So some of those alternative contracting mechanisms allow us to bring the contractor in earlier, which helps us, in our opinion, deliver a better project through the construction process. So that's just a high-level overview of how a project kind of gets from an idea all the way to getting built. So we're going to talk